Welcome everyone to the podcast. Thank you so much as always for joining me. How are you all feeling? Happy Monday if you're listening to this on the podcast drop date. Otherwise, happy whatever day of the week it is to you. So today is an interesting topic. We're talking about prophecy, premonition, and predictions. And this is something that my guides brought to me too. Actually, they've just been so chatty lately, which is absolutely so cool and so much fun. But they brought this topic forward because they said, and they had talked about this back in December 2023, they said that there would be a lot of false prophecies or old prophecies really coming to the surface this year, and we would have to really use our discernment to maneuver through it and figure out what that means for us individually as well as a collective. Now, let's talk about the definitions of those, because they're often kind of mixed around and used in all of the same way, and really it's up to you to determine what means what to you. But in terms of some language, the definition of prophecy is basically a prediction. Somebody making a prediction based on a knowing of sorts. Whether that is actually, no, you know what? We're going to leave it at that. A prediction based on a knowing of sorts. And the reason why I say that is the next one, premonition, is a clairvoyant vision of a future event. So that's based on a knowing that comes from a vision of a future event. So we could say that one's maybe a little bit more specifically connected to spirit. But then when we look at prediction is a calculated guess or assumption based on observable data. But then if prophecy's definition is a prediction, and a prediction is a calculated guess, you see how you can go round and around and around? Now, the reason why I say this is because we have certain words that prediction is not too heavy of a word, but prophecy is a big, heavy word, right? Kind of like omen. The word omen is a big, heavy word, but it just means like an indication of something. Just like prophecy technically means prediction. Premonition, though, that one stands out because that's a little bit different, right? So if prediction is based on assumed or observable data, then would that not then be prophecy? I say all of this because it's about bringing it back to discernment and taking away the fear energy behind certain words. And we know that there are Nostradamus prophecies, Baba Vanga prophecies, Edgar Cayce prophecies. These were different intuitives, mediums, psychics that had prophecies for certain times. Now, one thing we really need to recognize, though, with any kind of premonition prophecy is that it is basically the highest snapshot given at the point in time in which it is taken or received, right? Like when I do a reading and Spirit gives me insights on something for somebody, say their question is, will I get job A? And when I tune in, I will be given a probability, usually based on percentages, at that moment in time. And so I could say to the person, yes, there's a 90% probability that this is going to go in your favor. So that's pretty good. Like that's who doesn't want 90%, right? The thing is say it is 90% and it's between them and another candidate. But then say after the snapshot that was taken and the time in which I asked the question, the other candidate, they discover that person actually also did or had another skill that was essential to the project, well then that could change it. Because at the time in which I got the snapshot, maybe the company deciding between the two people didn't know that the other person had this other skill. And because they know that now, it puts them on top. So that's really something important to consider because it helps with your discernment. Because what happens is there's a lot of prophecies that are going around right now that really are being played on in a way that is steeped in fear. Now, what makes this a little bit more confusing and kind of, I was going to say it kind of is connected to the time travel aspect of the podcast last week, but more so it's connected to the idea of the 3D and 5D split that we have been talking about, and a lot of people have been talking about. 3D, 5D split. Some people have said that 3D is one planet, 5D is another planet. The way that I've been shown 3D, 5D split is it's a level of consciousness. It's a level of awareness. It's dimensional consciousness. So you can be walking beside somebody who is very rooted in 3D consciousness while you are rooted in your 5D consciousness. And what can happen with that is someone who is rooted in 3D consciousness and follows a very fear-based narrative can co-create those fear-based realities into their world based on what they're focusing on. So they may experience more dire things, whereas when you are walking in a 5D consciousness, and again, I'm making this very general to explain my point, when you are walking and being in a 5D consciousness, you may see those dire things happening, but they're not affecting you as much or at all as the person. And that's the difference in the split that we're starting to see, is those that are continuing to cycle in old stories, old repeated patterns over and over and over, and those that are stepping out of those patterns into new ones that allow them to move through the world with more ease and grace. So if we see that as the 3D, 5D split, and we bring that idea back to prophecy and premonition, those in a 3D consciousness reading a prophecy of, the world crumbles, or the world comes to an end, right? Say this year, they're like, the world is going to come to an end in 2024. Somebody in a 3D consciousness may experience that and actually have that happen in their reality. Yet their fear that they're building is that the world itself is going to blow up or something like that or fall apart. Whereas the energy is very different for somebody in 5D consciousness. They may receive, the world is going to end in 2024, but what they end up experiencing is a crumbling of an old construct in 2024. Like we've seen in the last 4 years, right? We've seen these crumblings of things. And essentially, you could see it as the world as we knew it ended to make way for a new level of consciousness now. So prophecy and premonition is something we have to always take with a grain of salt. First of all, because it is a highest probability snapshot at any given time, there is always free will that can come in and alter the events of something. Even if something is highly designed in your blueprint that you're meant to experience, there are many, many ways in which you can get to a semblance of that experience. And that depends on, again, the choices that you make. And it can also really be dependent on certain things, certain choices of others that are involved in that experience for you as well. Free will has the opportunity to divert, detour, reroute, realign so many things in any given moment. So, in terms of prophecy and premonition, any prophecy or premonition that is given way in advance, say like a couple years or many, many, many years, has a way higher percentage of change because of the amount of time available for free will choices to alter an event. Whereas a premonition or a prophecy of something in just a day or two has a greater percentage of being more accurate because there's less time available to alter that experience or that knowing. And so I think this is something really important to talk about because it can change the way in which you relate to the things that come through your newsfeed, through conversations, and allows you to really sit in the driver's seat of conscious choice rather than fear. And that is something so important. Now, the other thing I want to say, another big word that is very much connected to prophecy and premonition is, and I talked about omen, but is the word apocalypse. Apocalypse is like end times, end of the world, end of everything as we know it. And a big part of that concept of the apocalypse has been about like stepping into Aquarius, which we are in now, The age of Aquarius is when there is the apocalypse and all will end. And it's really talking about the old archaic ways in which it was ending and a rebirth of what is now to begin again. And that is so important because we are constantly in motion of changing our outcomes based on the greater knowledge that we have. So if you think about the more that we have been opening and awakening, especially these last 4 years, we have been stepping into consciousness, cleaning out our traumas, you name it, getting to know who we are. Every time somebody does that, that starts to change the trajectory of what was before. And so this is a really good thing because we are seeing these changes happening and we're seeing this growth happening, and we don't have to keep tying it back to the predictions that were made 50 years ago, 100 years ago, hundreds of years ago. Because if we deal with what is in the now, that's where we get to create the greatest change and the greatest movement forward. What matters now? It doesn't mean we need to ignore the things in the past. We can absolutely gather all the intel. Spirit tells me that all the time. They're like, gather up all the intel you can and then make your own conscious decision of what you want, what you think, what you believe. This is where you get to step in and discern what you think. And this is extremely important right now in this energy of rapid awakening. Because although we did so much awakening, 100 years worth of growth in the span of 4 years, like you have all heard me say many times, from 2020 to 2024, now that we're in 2024, we're in a new energy, but we're in a fast energy, and we are still rapidly awakening in a new level, so to speak. And so this means massive variabilities in prophecies and premonitions, okay? And I really feel it is so important to recognize that, because if we bring it back now to the time travel idea that I spoke about on last week's podcast, if you're in one timeline in an ascended consciousness, so one timeline where you're highly in 5D consciousness, your experience of any said prophecy or prediction is vastly different than if you're in another timeline in a 3D consciousness, like I said. But if your awareness is such of being able to be multidimensional and move through time, your different parallel, past, future timelines, then your limitation or your connection to said prophecy is vastly different. And if you're sitting in that seat if you're sitting in the driver's seat of it, knowing conscious choice plays a big role in it, then where does that prophecy fit? It's simply a piece of information or intel, like Spirit says, for you to gather up, to review, to look at amongst all the other stuff, and then make the best decision for you. So this is why prophecy and premonition is really starting to shift and change, especially from like the older ones, even Nostradamus stuff. Like, yes, we can apply it to some things, but also some things are so vague. So vague. So this is where we get to really step into our power. And this year is so much about stepping into our power, removing things that are fear-based, removing things that are attempting to manipulate in whichever form you want to see that. And what I mean by that is Spirit showed me on the weekend a timeline that kind of like the older timeline, or one of the parallel kind of 3D timelines right now, is very busy, very noisy, very dense, kind of like a really busy city street, which, I mean, it's not a negative thing, but it's really busy and dense and noisy, versus the more 5D timeline that many of you are already on is more like a golden frequency timeline, kind of like a golden city. And the differences between those two is really connected to flow. And so many of us are feeling the pull or stepping into or rooted into that higher timeline, even though we can fully observe the, kind of 3D timeline. But the thing with that is we don't take all the baggage from the 3D timeline into the 5D one. It's very different. So prophecy, prediction, and premonition in the 5D timeline is different. And it's for you to discern what that is. Because I even asked Spirit, I was like, okay, Spirit, if we're stepping into this 5D timeline, many people are already, what prophecies, predictions, and premonitions are there in there for us? And they're like, Ginette, we could answer you with those things. But in that realm, that level of consciousness, with people starting to open up to the understanding of multiple timelines and their maneuverability and everything, they're like, we could give you probabilities, but they are always changing and moving. They're always active. There's no stagnancy. It's in the denser realities that there's more stagnancy. The higher you go in frequency of consciousness, the less stagnancy there is. So they said, on a general whole, though, we can tell you that the growth and trajectory is significantly higher and more flow-based in that frequency, in that timeline, that kind of golden 5D timeline versus the 3D one. And I think we can all see that for ourselves if we ponder it too. Because think about, where in your life are you feeling that ease and grace and that calm energy and that flow? That aspect of your life is most likely in that higher 5D consciousness. And there might be some other parts of your life, say your work, for example, is still feeling really clunky and there's drama and all this. That part of your life is probably still in the 3D. And it's normal to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit as we move through the change of it. It's normal to sometimes feel like you have one foot in each. It's normal to feel like you're all in the other, and then suddenly something pulls you back into the old one. That's normal in the stage of transition. But Spirit is really encouraging us not to bring old fear narratives into the new one, but open up to what is available into the new. And in the new timeline and frequency, your co-creation, your thoughts, your desires, your manifestations have a bigger role than we've been yet to understand. We are massive co-creators of our reality, especially the higher the consciousness we go. And so I really want to be clear again. They're showing me to lay it out one more time that you may very well, most likely, be in that 5D timeline for most of you, if not all of you, right? All of your being in that 5D timeline. It doesn't mean you won't see what's happening in 3D, but you will feel somewhat of a separation from it, from the old fear trigger, like guttural fear trigger. That's a key piece to notice, that you're in that higher timeline. You may notice that the things that are affecting other people seem to not be kind of touching you, as if you have this force field around you where you're like, I'm really glad I'm not in that. Things like that will help you to see that your perspective is different. And so Spirit again is saying, really pay attention to where you're at, what you're doing, releasing fear narratives, changing your energetics of prophecies, premonitions, recognizing they are a snapshot, and embracing the snapshot that they do give you. Because when Spirit does give you a snapshot, it is there to help you, not hinder you. None of these snapshots are meant to be completely fear-inducing so that we are stagnant and limited, because that only brings us backwards. So even if Spirit is wanting to bring you an insight of something, it's to give you the information to make the best choices with, rather than doom, gloom, trauma, fear, waiting for something fearful. So I hope that helps explain it. I hope that was clear enough. And Spirit's going to be coming back with a lot more of this kind of stuff. I really feel like they're wanting to bring more clarity on things. I know this past while, the messages have been about clarity and being clear, and them helping to understand, or helping us to understand more of how things really work as we open into this multidimensional, multi-timeline consciousness. So if we can take fear of prophecy, prediction, and premonition out of it, bring ourselves back into discernment, bringing or gathering all the intel we can find about any certain thing or event or concept, bring it all up, read it all, discern, feel your way through it, and then move forward in confidence of who you are and what that means for you. That is where we sit in our position of power. So I will leave that with all of you. Thank you so much for joining me as always. I really appreciate it. As well, I do want to invite you to Cosmic Consciousness. It's going to be a lot of fun. You definitely want to check it out. It's going to be on this Wednesday. Again, it depends on when you're listening to this, but Wednesday, February 21st, Cosmic Consciousness, you can sign up at avalonspirit.com, and I so look forward to seeing you all there. Have a good, wonderful rest of your week, everyone. I'll see you next week.